In Pizzeria Simulator, the Candy Cadet animatronic can tell one of 3 different stories that seem to connect directly to the overarching story of the franchise. However, while certain interpretations of the stories tend to be widely held, I think there are certain aspects of them that have gone largely overlooked that tell a different story than the one the community has assumed. So for those of you who have been waiting for this since I mentioned it in my sister location video, and for those of you who may just be here to have some questions answered, strap in and consider subscribing because I'm going to explain just what everyone missed about the Candy Cadet stories and what that means for these stories' implications overall. For those who don't know, Candy Cadet tells 3 stories in Pizzeria Simulator. One story is about a boy with a pet snake who found 5 kittens in a box, turned a blind eye as the snake ate one, and after 5 nights felt bad, cut open the snake, and put the kitten back together and in the box. Another is about a woman sealed in a room with 5 keys that unlock rooms with kids trapped inside and a furnace. She can only leave the room with 1 key, so she melts the keys together in an attempt to save them all, but because the keys are melted together, the kids remain trapped. The final story is about a man who adopted a group of 5 orphans to keep them safe, but a burglar broke in and killed the 5 kids, who the man stitched together because he could only afford 1 coffin, and after they were buried, he heard a knock at the door. It's pretty easy to see how these stories share some common factors. All the stories have 5 things and stuff being put together, and as such, the theory I usually see is that these stories are different tellings of the same event, all being evidence that the 5 children that William killed during the Missing Children's Incident, or MCI, were combined into Molten Freddy, with each of the stories being either William's or different people's perspectives of the 5 things becoming one. However, while I do see the reasoning for this, there's one pretty major detail that signals to me that this isn't the case, namely the fact that not all of the stories are about 5 things becoming one. In the story about the 5 kittens, only 1 kitten is eaten by the snake, and after 5 nights is put back together. In the story itself, there's no mention of other kittens being eaten, and only 1 kitten is said to be put in the box. And given fully grown snakes only eat once a week, there's no reason to assume that 5 were eaten over the course of each of the nights, especially since the story says that the boy thought that choosing 1 kitten to feed the snake might satisfy it. The only place I've seen that does say 5 kittens were eaten is the Ultimate Guide, and given it says that sister location takes place at Circus Baby's Pizza World instead of Entertainment and Rentals, and that we don't know what event FNAF 3 is 30 years after, only to a couple pages later say Phone Dude says it's 30 years after the closing of Freddy's, which Phone Dude never says, gets one of Scrap Baby's lines in Pizzeria Simulator wrong, and a whole bunch of other things I don't have time to go over, I would not rely on it for accurate information. Additionally, while I can see why people think that William is the one the stories are about, none of the main characters of the stories really fit William and his motivations as well as other characters do. The young woman tried to help the kids while in a trapped position herself. The boy feels guilt and tries to fix things, though for this story specifically I can understand the interpretation of William, which I'll get into later, and the man is scared for the orphan's safety and a burglar is the one to kill them. Meanwhile, in the games, William definitely doesn't help the kids, doesn't seem to feel particularly guilty about killing them or care about their safety, making all the stories being about him not incredibly likely. As such, if the stories aren't all about 5 things becoming one through something like Molten Freddy, or talking about William's direct actions, what are they really about? I think that the Candy Cadet stories are meant to give us special insight into 3 characters and the roles that they played in the franchise. For those who watched my video on Sister Location's timeline placement, you may remember I mentioned what characters I think these stories are about. But as some had questions about my assignments, and they probably do seem strange without context, I'll go through each and explain my reasoning for why I came to that conclusion. For example, I think the key story is pretty clearly about Charlie, Emily, and the missing children. After all, the story stars a young woman sealed in a room and 5 trapped children, which sounds rather reminiscent of Charlie, whose soul was sealed in the puppet, and the 5 victims of the missing children incident who were similarly trapped in their animatronic suits. The woman in the story has the keys to free the kids, but in an effort to save them all, rather than just one, she merges the keys to their freedom together, leaving them all trapped. Meanwhile, in the Give Gifts, Give Life minigame in FNAF 2, Charlie, as the puppet, tries to help the 5 kids William killed, but her attempts to give them life leave them haunting animatronic vessels for decades, unable to move on until a happiest day involving the entire group can take place as their fates are bound together, just like the keys to the kids in the story's freedom. What's cool is that by looking at this story through the lens of it being Charlie trying to save the kids, it gives some extra insight that we wouldn't have gotten from just the minigame in FNAF 2. The young woman in the story had the opportunity to save 1 child along with herself, but in her attempts to save all of them left them all trapped. This could mean that Charlie could have saved one of the missing children, as Remnant doesn't just anchor souls to the realm of the living, but it can also heal, as shown by the Tales from the Pizzaplex story Frailty, where a girl uses Remnant to heal people who would otherwise die. However, because Charlie tried to save all of them, she split her power between the whole group, keeping them anchored to the realm of the living, but not fully alive either. Maybe the end of the Give Gifts, Give Life minigame, where she gives the kids the animatronic masks, isn't the only important part, as it could be that the gifts were Charlie's attempts to save them all, but when that didn't work, she gave them a way to live through the animatronics. But hey, that's just a theory, and it doesn't change much if you interpret it a bit differently. But whatever the case may be, the story lines up pretty well being about Charlie's actions during the missing children's incident, and how those actions led to the situation we see in later games. As for the Kitten Story, it's the most noticeably different due to the fact that it's the one story that doesn't involve 5 things becoming one. And in part due to that major difference, I think the boy in this story is a solid parallel to Michael Afton as of sister location. While that may sound strange, hear me out. The boy in the story has a snake that is specifically mentioned to be the color red, just like a certain Funtime animatronic, that kills one kitten at random just as Circus Baby killed one child. Based on that alone, I can see the argument being made that the boy represents William, who owned Circus Baby and lost his daughter to the animatronic. But there are a lot of aspects of the story that make me think it's Michael. The story specifically says that it's after 5 nights that the boy feels regret and puts the kitten back together. The fact that it calls out the 5 nights is especially interesting to me, since Mike is the one who spent 5 nights at Circus Babies and was the one to do the action of putting his sister back together according to his monologue in Sister Location, with the kitten being put back in the box that the 4 other kittens were in, likely representing Elizabeth combining with the 4 other Funtime animatronics to create Ennard. Additionally, the fact that the term boy is used in the Candy Cadet story, implying a child, makes it pretty clear to me that the character this story is meant to represent is the younger of the 2 Afton men. As such, I think the purpose of this story is to explain Michael's character progression and motivations. I think the snake represents both the Circus Baby animatronic and William, since he's the one who programmed Baby to kill, and the description of the snake as having a hunger that couldn't be satisfied connects pretty well to William having a desire to kill more children. Michael may not have helped his father find a victim or given Elizabeth to Circus Baby himself, but he did turn a blind eye, hoping that if he left things alone, everything would resolve itself without him being complicit. However, after spending 5 nights at Freddy's sister location, his guilt led him to putting his sister back together and to him turning on William, the man responsible for her death. You can probably find other ways to explain certain details, and some parts of the interpretation are a matter of perspective, but whatever the case may be, I think this story fits Michael's story as of sister location very well. So if the key story is about Charlie and the kitten story is about Michael, that just leaves the story about the man and the orphans. This is the story I think connects the best to the usual fandom interpretation of connections to Molten Freddy, though not in the way you might think. To me, this story seems to be about Henry Emily in the lead-up to Pizzeria Simulator. The man in the story brought the orphans toys and gladness, while Henry ran a restaurant and built robots to entertain children. The man lived alone, and Henry was similarly lonely after the loss of his daughter. The burglar killed 5 orphans at the man's home, and William killed 5 children at the restaurant Henry co-owned. Additionally, the mention of how at night there was a knock at the door could connect to how the scrap animatronics show up in the alleyway during Pizzeria Simulator. You may notice I didn't talk about the part of the story where the man stitched the bodies of the orphans together to put them in one coffin. This is what a lot of people use to connect this story to the theory that the souls of the kids from the missing children's incident were taken from the original animatronics and put into the Funtime animatronics, which eventually combined and somewhat separated, given Scrap Baby's off doing her own thing, to become Molten Freddy, aka MoltenMCI. While it would be impossible for their whole souls to end up in the Funtimes, as shown by the FNAF 3 ending where Happiest Day doesn't happen, showing the eyes of the original animatronics lit to indicate the spirit's presence in the robots, it's possible for some of their remnants to have been extracted and put into the Funtimes at some point, along the lines of how in the 4th closet the souls were still linked to their original suits, but had control of the animatronics that William put a portion of their remnant into. However, I don't think this portion of the story is meant to prove MoltenMCI, and not just because it wouldn't make much sense for Henry to have created Molten Freddy. The missing kid's spirits would have had to end up in the Pizzeria Simulator location somehow, but I think this story is about the souls located at the FNAF 3 location, not Molten Freddy, which would be better represented by the knock at the door. Molten Freddy got itself to the location, but without Happiest Day releasing their souls, the kids would still be stuck to the broken parts in the FNAF 3 location. And given Happiest Day involves Charlie's spirit moving on when she's definitely around in Pizzeria Simulator as Lefty, I get the feeling Happiest Day didn't happen at that point in time. However, just as they needed to get to the Pizzeria Simulator location, Henry needed something to inspire him to create it. And given Henry's recording where he talks about the situation and his plan to call the animatronics back is labeled HRY223, I have a feeling I know what that inspiration was. After all, FNAF 3 most likely takes place in the year 2023, which could mean the tape is an abbreviated form of Henry 2023. If this is the case, it doesn't just make 2023 the first year a game takes place to coincide with the year we experienced since the start of the franchise, but it implies that Henry's speech is in reference to something he discovered with the events at the FNAF 3 location, which just so happens to be where the parts containing the souls would have been located. Whether you believe it was him or Michael actually working there doesn't matter too much, because he wouldn't have needed to be working at the location to get his hands on them. At the end of FNAF 3, we find out that the location burned down thanks to a newspaper clipping that, when brightened, shows Springtrap. But what I find interesting with this newspaper is the text at the end, saying that the few items that were salvaged will be sold at public auction. Given the endings of FNAF 3 show the intact heads of the original animatronics, it seems as though those heads were part of the salvageable items from the location, which means they would have been included in the items sold at the auction. From there, it's completely possible that Henry saw either the article or the auction itself, got a hold of the items, then noticed that they were haunted, or vice versa. After all, Henry says,
"It's only now that I understand the depth of the depravity of this creature, this monster that I unwillingly helped to create, as if what he had already done wasn't enough. He found a new way to desecrate, to humiliate, to destroy, as if the suffering wasn't enough. The loss of innocence, the loss of everything to so many people. Small souls trapped in prisons of my making, now set to new purpose, and used in ways I never thought imaginable.
While the wording of the entire speech is a bit vague and open to interpretation, to me this section of it implies that only now, as of 2023, he understands that William not only killed the children, but managed to trap their souls in the animatronics Henry made, making them prisons now serving the unimaginable purpose of containing the souls of children. As such, I believe the portion of the Candy Cadet story about the man combining the orphans' bodies to fit them into one coffin is meant to represent Henry literally bringing the remains of the original animatronics, haunted by the missing kids' souls, together to Pizzeria Simulator, where the building would serve as their coffin, with the stitching together figuratively representing how the conditions were made right for the kids, whose keys to freedom were similarly merged in the key story to be able to move on. Of course, it's absolutely understandable if you see things differently. My interpretations aren't definitive or anything. But overall, I think these interpretations are pretty satisfying, with each story being about one of the characters who acted to fix the problems William created. But hey, if you have any thoughts, feel free to let me know in the comments and I'll check them out. Please consider sharing this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to see my future content, don't get stabbed, and have a nice day.